Awesome. Hi, everyone. This is the first NL seminar of 2024. Welcome. We're doing something a bit different this time. Rather than NLP research, we're talking about hieroglyphs. So I'm excited to hear about this. The title of the talk is Some Hieroglyphs and then an Introduction to Egyptian and Hieroglyphs to Coptic. It will be the talk given by Ulf, our senior research scientist and computational linguist in the Natural Language Group at ISI. He works on a wide range of languages, and he has a PhD in computer science from the University of Texas at Austin. So without further ado, let's welcome Ulf.
Good morning. Thank you very much. So this might be the first time in ISI's illustrious 50-year history with a presentation with an official title in hieroglyphs. So before I even start with an overview of the big picture, let's dive right in and decode and decrypt what this might mean. So here we have 7 hieroglyphs, and we start with the right side over here. So the crocodile hide stands for the sounds K and M.
Which one is the crocodile hide?
Crocodile hide.
No, of course. Right.
Or scales, crocodile scales, KM. The owl stands for the sound M. And interestingly, it's not an additional M, it kind of confirms the M over here from the crocodile hide. And the loaf of bread over here represents the sound T. This one doesn't represent a sound at all. As you might see, this is kind of like a cross, and it's a symbol that basically depicts an intersection with a settlement around it. And it basically hints that we have a settlement, a town, or some geopolitical entity on our hands. So if you like name entity tagging, this one will be your friend. It's not pronounced, it's basically giving a semantic clue of what we're talking about. So we have some sort of settlement, and in fact, what we have here is Kemet, the land of Kemet. Kemet is the Egyptian word for Egypt. Okay, so we have Egypt here on the right.
The current Egyptian word for Egypt?
The Egyptian, it's not the Arabic word for Egyptian,
Yes.
but the old Egyptian word.
But it is the old Egyptian word for
Egypt.
I see, got it.
We're going to get a little bit more into that later on. So here we have Egypt. And on the left, we have more hieroglyphs. So the mouth symbol often represents the sound R, but here it does not. And specifically here, we have an ideogram over here, the stroke over here, which says, don't take the phonetic meaning, take the ideogram meaning, right? So this means mouth, not R, because this stroke kind of tells us so. Similarly, the owl can actually stand for an owl, right? So it can stand for M, and it could stand for owl. And if they had this extra stroke below, then that would be an indication that, you know, we mean owl, not the letter M.
It's kata kanji. Ideograms and sounds in the same number. So is this in classical usage? Yeah, are the phonetics common, or is it mostly?
Yes. So a lot of phonetics. We see lots of more examples. So this is actually quite typical. And then here we have, you know, symbol. It can either represent the M, and in this case specifically, it's a preposition, means to or of. So we have mouth of Egypt, and mouth stands also for language, right? So the English word language is based on Latin lingua, which originally means tongue. And so the tongue represents language. And so for the Egyptians, it's the mouth representing the language. And so here the title of our presentation is the language of Kemet, the language of Egypt.
Is it a plow directional reading?
We're going to get to that. So in this case, it's kind of left to right, mostly, right? So we have the mouth, the stroke, the preposition, KM, M, T, GPE. But Egyptian is kind of flexible in this sense here. It's a good question. So this is actually very typical. So we have a lot of phonetics, right? So things are kind of sounded out. But we also have a determinative. We have an ideogram, the mouth, and then we kind of have a spectral kind of grammatical hint. And so this is actually quite representative. So this, you know, was like a good example here to warm people up. And we'll see a little bit more detail later on. So the overview, So the motivation of this talk is that there are currently 2 Egyptian exhibitions at the Getty Villa, and our natural language group will go there on Saturday afternoon. So I'll provide a little bit context of Egyptian. Then we're going to go deeper into the components of Egyptian hieroglyphic text, the logograms or ideograms, the phonograms, the determinatives, talk a little bit about Egyptian scripts, of which there are several, writing directions, many hands-on examples, and talk a little bit about the decryption of the hieroglyphs. So the name of Egypt, so you probably haven't heard Kemet much before, right? And so it is still, though, in use today in the Coptic language of the present day. It's referred to as Kemet. So the T kind of disappeared over the last couple of thousand years, but there's clearly like a continuation there. However, in the Middle East, by far, the more common one is Misr. So that's what Egypt is called in Egyptian, in Arabic, including in Egyptian Arabic. And so there are a lot of variants, like in Hebrew. Hebrew literally actually means like the 2 Egypts, and you can see this is like a very old root, thousands of years old, as you might kind of see, you know, even during the era of cuneiform, we already had that Semitic root. Most of the languages in the world, though, they use something like Egypt on the right side, so they're all based on the Greek word Egyptos, and so we have all kinds of variations, kind of with minor adaptations to the specific language. So that's the globally more dominant one, and it's based on a corruption of Ptah, which means home of the cow of Ptah, which is a name of a specific temple in Memphis, right?
What's the Misr, Mitzrayim root? Do you know the origin, the explanation of the Misr, Mitzrayim, Misr, like what?
Good question. So this is super old, like 3,000-4,000 years old.
So is Kemet.
So Kemet is old. So Kemet, so it's the Black Land. So that's kind of the fertile land of the Nile River Valley. There are a number of hypotheses. One hypothesis is borderland, right? But it's sort of like there's not really super firm basis. I mean, this is sort of like clouded in a little bit of the mystery of history. Or do you have a good sense of? So Basil just came fresh back from his native Egypt. So what's the root of Misr?
Yeah.
The master of Islam. I think I don't know. I read somewhere before, as far as I remember, that Misraim is the name of a person that actually, like, that's how they.
Yeah.
But I'm not.
Yeah. So I think the slightly leading hypothesis is kind of the borderland, but there are several other ones, and I think there's not a lot of clarity where it comes from. So Egyptian is an Afro-Asiatic language, and it's the same overall family as Semitic languages, such as Arabic, Hebrew, and Aramaic. Berber languages are part of that. So Berber languages are spoken in Northwest Africa. We have Somali and Oromo. We have Hausa, and then a few smaller languages in Ethiopia that are part of this broader family. So Egyptian is not a Semitic language, but it's related. And it's kind of like, when I looked at the Egyptian language, it was kind of quite obvious that it was related to. What happened here? Refresh me. All right, thank you. Yeah. Okay. So it is related to Semitic languages, but it is not a Semitic language itself. So there's a long evolution of the Egyptian language. So it goes back way back, and so there are different periods of the Egyptian language. When people study ancient Egyptian, they mostly mean Middle Egyptian, so that's like one of the golden eras over there. And you can see that for a lot of the vocabulary, there is really some continuity. So people suppose that pronunciation was Nafrat in Old Egyptian, which eventually kind of morphed into Nofre. So you kind of see a little bit of trend. So often there was a T, which eventually was lost. And so there is a continuous kind of heritage there.
So which period were like the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, when was that supposed to have been built?
So I think there was, Middle Egyptian was like a major period.
The pyramids?
Yeah.
No, the pyramids during the Old Kingdom, it's even before.
Even before,
Yeah.
so the pyramids, but a lot of the inscriptions were, I think, then later on,
Yeah.
A lot of the temples and other things.
So most of the writing that we're going to see comes from the Middle Egyptian period, like at the museum.
It is, so it's some of Middle Egyptian and then some later one.
Okay, but nothing. So there's not.
So we're not going to see any archaic. I mean, partly it's going to they're going to display papyrus and mummy wrappings, and so it's a little bit of a challenge for that to kind of be preserved for like 5,000 years.
Plus the English people have.
And then other interesting things happen too. Yeah. So Coptic is basically the modern descendant of the old Egyptian language. So Coptic as a literary language was kind of from about 300 to 800 AD, and then it declined really, after the Arabic conquest of Egypt in around 640. As a spoken language at home, as a native language, it continued for another millennium roughly. Today, there's really no Egyptians left that speak it as a native language at home in the community, but it is still used as a liturgical language. A little bit like, Latin has for a long time been used, in the Catholic Church. So it is active in that sense, but not as a primary native language, rather as a liturgical language. You have a question? Yes.
Yeah, so for the liturgical usage, I guess the pronunciation is no longer what it would have been, like the same for Latin. For everything. Right?
Yes.
I mean, if you have the same word from 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. As you see here, right? So
we can't know, right, what vowels people use.
Well, people actually have a lot of clues.
Vowels?
Even for vowels, yeah. So one trick is there might be a transcription from Old Egyptian in cuneiform, form, where and they kind of put down the vowels. And so obviously we're there's partial knowledge. So the further back we go, there's some areas where we're not as knowledgeable. But there is, for example, really clear evidence that this is Kumad, which then became Kemet, that there were vowel changes going on. But you see the continuity over here. I mean, even here, so this would be like modern, liturgical Coptic here, but it's quite similar to the word, as of a couple of thousand years ago. And we'll have a sample of Coptic a little bit later. So Egyptian language has a number of scripts. So the famous ones are the hieroglyphs that you kind of basically see on pyramids and in temples over there. So they've been super old. And then hieratic is a script that was basically that it's kind of variant form used for writing on papyrus, wood, linen, and stone. And the Demotic, which means people script, so the demo part is the same as a democracy, is then even more simplified. So this would have been used, just kind of for merchants, kind of keeping track of inventory, maybe, right? And so they don't want to really spend hours on one consonant, right? And the truth is that there's a little bit of a continuum really between them. So there's not like this is hieroglyph, this is hieratic, and 3 different types. Unicode actually only has the kind of one code block for which typically represents the hieroglyphs. It doesn't even have the cursive scripts represented. But we see at the exhibition different forms of scripts. So the hieroglyphs are the most known ones. And then here we have on the left bottom an example of Egyptian hieratic script, and here of Demotic script.
I feel like you said that the Unicode doesn't have them, but if it's a one-to-one mapping, then like Unicode, it's not Unicode purview, right? It's the font.
Right. And so in some sense, they could argue it's a font issue. Yeah, exactly. Very, very good comment there. So the hieroglyphs have some more flexible direction. We're going to get to that later on. Then later in the cursive scripts, it's very predominantly right to left, and modern Coptic is left to right. And so Coptic is a very different script. So there's a clear break between Demotic and Coptic. We'll get to that a little bit later. Okay. So with the Coptic alphabet, So the Coptic alphabet is very different. So the Coptic alphabet is actually based, and so we see an example over here. It's mostly based on the Greek alphabets with a couple of extra letters from the Demotic script. So what does Egyptian sound like? So if you can read Greek, you can almost read along. So this is something that Egyptian Orthodox Coptic Christians would be familiar with. It's the Trinitarian invocation. And as you might have noticed, so the sound here does not exist in Greek, and the sound is not represented in Greek either. So they kind of plug the holes with symbols from the Demotic script. So this is slightly simplified over here. So really the Old Egyptian is kind of the mother of many scripts in the Middle East and Europe. And so, it's a root there for Arabic, and then, Latin alphabet, Greek alphabet, Russian alphabet. And so the Coptic is mostly directly from Greek with a few additional letters from Demotic. But Greek, if you go far enough back, kind of goes back to the Egyptian hieroglyphs there as well.
That's just the script hierarchy, not the grammar.
Script, yes. So the grammars of these languages are very, very different, right? So you have Indo-European languages, Semitic languages, and so
Does Greek have a sh letter?
no, it does not.
So Russian has a sh letter which looks very much like at least the Hebrew sh letter. So there must be some connection there.
Yeah, and they actually, I think this is the sh, and they actually borrowed it from. So the Russians got most of it from Greek, but the sh they got from Coptic. So neither Greek nor Latin has a sh sound, and this is why today in English, we don't have a single letter for sh, but we have the sh.
Wait, but Hebrew does. So if you're saying that they got it from Coptic, but Coptic didn't get it directly from Hebrew, are you saying that the hieroglyphic form has this?
So the Hebrew and the Coptic are eventually based on the same hieroglyph, and
It's going to be a common ancestor, right?
yeah. So I don't have the example there, and so it's not a coincidence because they share the same ancestor eventually. And so Old Egyptian actually has this, right? It has the sh as a single sound. So there was a lot of Greek influence in Egypt. So it started out with the conquest by Alexander the Great, and then one of his generals was called Ptolemy, and so he was the founder of the Ptolemaic dynasty that went all the way from Ptolemy the First to Cleopatra as the last one. Then Egypt was incorporated into the Roman Empire. But in the eastern half of the Roman Empire, Greek was really very dominant, specifically in the Byzantine Empire. And then, of course, with the advent of Christianity, kind of Greek got another boost because the New Testament was also written in Greek. So lots of Greek influence. So that explains the alphabet. And if you go back here to this one over here, so if you speak Greek, you would recognize this as a word of Greek origin. So it's very similar. So when I kind of mentioned this to Hieroglyphs, he kind of immediately kind of said, oh, that's a Greek word. And this one here is Hebrew. But most of the words are of kind of Old Egyptian origin. So writing directions in the old hieroglyphs are kind of fairly flexible. So we have 4 ways to kind of write the same thing, right? So here we have a vulture, and you can basically tell the direction by finding faces. So we have here faces either of people or here in this case of animals, and you read into the face, right? So if you see some animal or some goddess or some human, you read into the face. So the vulture is the first character, the lion the second one, and then the cup with the handle is the next one, the folded cloth, reed, and so forth. But you can write the same thing like this one over here, kind of mirror image. But you can also write it top down, and then here you can have the second direction either right to left or the second direction left to right. Right. So this one comes first, and then the reed comes second. So you really have flexibility. So this is a carving over here. It's a cartouche with 10 hieroglyphs, and so the numbers basically indicate the order in which this one's read. So you see the vulture again here, so that kind of helps you, and then the line with the direction. And unlike Chinese, where everything is nicely squared and then put together, they're much more flexible and just kind of arrange things kind of to make it work, to make it kind of pleasing.
Does that lead to confusion on order? I mean, the example you have here, there's no confusion, but say if the sixth symbol was a little more to the left, would you like? Have you noticed this sort of confusion?
I've seen cases where sometimes they would actually juxtapose, just kind of swap letters, just to kind of make it look better. Like a little bit like English crocodile and Spanish cocodrilo, where they just kind of swap the two for aesthetic visual effect there. But by and large, this is readily unambiguous. So you have to be a little bit flexible, right? So you might have, you know, the 9 comes after the 8 here, but it already takes up a little space, you know, of the vulture.
And how much hieroglyphic writing do we actually have?
It's quite substantial.
Like hundreds of thousands of words, millions of words? Like enough that you could have discovered ambiguous sentences where, like, if you had changed the order slightly.
We'll get actually to a few examples where there is sort of variation. So here's a quiz. So what's the first character here
Of what?
of the text?
Where you just the background?
Yeah. So there's of course there's kind of big pictures here. So we have, you know, 2 gods and some human there, and then the rest is text. And so if what is visible, where does it start?
Top left. Oh wait.
Good reaction.
The bird is, you're gonna go from the bird down, right? But
It's top right because there's multiple birds looking to the right. You have to go to the earliest.
So here we have the bird look to the right. So the direction here based on this bird would be to the left, right? And so we have a lot of things kind of facing to the right.
there's that one.
But on the other hand, here we have some god facing the opposite direction, right? So what it means is there are 2 text panels, obviously, right? So one is to the left of this line, and it's read kind of like this. And then there's a second text panel that starts over here and reads like this. So the first character is a read, then there's plural marker, subject person, water ripple, and so forth.
This is one panel though. This is not like you didn't make a composite image.
No, so this is actually one inscription.
So how do we know to read the left side before the right side?
Well, because they face different directions.
Yeah, it could be the right side and then the left side.
Yeah, in some sense they are. Basically, you have 2 text boxes, and the left text box starts here, and the right text box starts there. So in some sense, you know, you could say there's 2 text boxes, and but there are in fact 2. And so it actually starts here for the left text box, and starts there for the second one, and then here we have God and Word, which was hieroglyph.
And is there something here that tells us that these 2 are connected, or could it be that the left side is that donut recipe and the right side is the list of attendance for this conference?
Unlikely. They're probably related.
Okay. So
I mean, this is in actual. I mean, there's you know a little bit cut off there, so this is not the complete picture, but this would be, you know, some coherent story.
right, then that makes John's question more relevant, right? Because then there's an order.
I mean, it's like a plaque and another plaque.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Like, no, they're both important. You don't have an order.
So anyway, so there's 2 text areas over here, which easily identified by finding that the faces look different ways. So Rosetta Stone, very famous in the history of decrypting Egyptian. So the art of reading Egyptian hieroglyphs was kind of lost around 400 AD, but out of use. But there was always a fascination with hieroglyphs. What do they say? And that knowledge was really lost for well over 1,000 years. And so eventually they found the Rosetta Stone. So it's named after Rosetta, which is a port city in Egypt, about 40 miles from Alexandria. I think it's Rashid in modern Egyptian. So this was created 196 BC to display decree by the child pharaoh Ptolemy V, who granted favors, including financial favors to the priesthood, and then in return the priest said good things, good PR about the young pharaoh over here. So it's about this high, the fragment that we have, 3/4 of a ton, and very importantly, it has parallel text. It has text in hieroglyphic. At the bottom, at the top is hieroglyphic. Then we have Demotic script, and then we have Greek. So we have 3 scripts. How many languages do we have? 2. Yeah.
When you say Greek, what do you mean?
Greek language in Greek script.
Modern Greek?
No. So it is. We're going to get to that on the next slide. So John is always kind of slightly ahead. So of course you had scholars. So there's the classical Greek of, like 400 BC, 300 BC. Then there's like the biblical, 1st century Greek, and then there's modern Greek. And this would be, well, guess what? It was kind of like the Greek as of 2,200 years ago in Egypt. And in fact, this was actually one of the problems, because it was not exactly the classical Greek. It was not exactly biblical Greek. It actually had some Egyptian jargon in there specific to their culture, which made it actually not totally trivial to read it. And so you actually needed some specialists that were kind of steeped in specifically Egyptian culture.
So these are Greeks living in, it's Greek influence because the Greek was just such a dominant part of it.
Yeah. So this was discovered during the invasion by Napoleon of Egypt. So in 1799, the French, with Napoleon physically there, invaded France, and then not only brought an army and a navy, which is kind of like required for a military campaign. They also had a lot of engineers, a lot of scientists, botanists, and so this was also like an expedition there. And so they were actually looking for interesting things. So they actually found the Rosetta Stone. They were kind of hoping to find something like that. So it was not a total coincidence, right? And when they found it, they immediately kind of realized the significance of this. Didn't turn out so well for Napoleon in Egypt. So he was maybe not quite as welcome as he had hoped. Eventually, the British and Ottoman Turks made an alliance, ganged up on the French, and were victorious. And then the booty was divided between the British and the Ottoman Turks, and the Rosetta Stone was part of the British booty. And so that was shipped right to London, where it's been ever since for the last 220 years displayed in the British Museum. So, so people think that historians believe that the first text that was written was actually the Greek. And this was because, the pharaoh and the upper class and, top priesthood, particularly in Alexandria, were kind of Greek speaking. And then it was translated to Demotic, which is literally the people's language. I mean, this is what most people in Egypt would have spoken at the time. And then it was translated into Hieroglyphs. And it was translated into Hieroglyphs more for prestigious reasons, right? So you know that the motto of the United States is in Latin, E pluribus unum, and the motto of USC is also in Latin. Why is it in Latin? Not because to help people understand it more easily, but because it's more prestigious, right? Something with palms and carrying and worthiness. But it is in Latin, right? As it is for a lot of old universities. So this is for prestige rather than, to enable it to more widely read. So you see that actually quite a bit of the original was lost. So this is what people think it kind of looked like before. So we only have about a third of the hieroglyphs here. So this one's much taller, but this was super useful in the decipherment here. So there was a lot of interest even before they found the stone, and then when they found the Rosetta Stone, there was like a frenzy, really. And a few nice things is there was actually quite a bit of collaborative effort among scholars. So they would make precise copies of the text and share them, even between British and French, which were kind of at war at the time with each other. So there was sort of like a good collaborative effort, kind of the equivalent of GitHub at the time. And it took them quite a while to actually decipher it, right? So you see there's like a 23-year gap over here. So the key breakthrough here was by one Jean-François Champollion, which was a French linguist over there. And so he finally kind of cracked it in 1822. And there were 2 components for him cracking it. I mean, the parallel corpus here, the Rosetta Stone, was of course very important. But he tried to decipher it just based on the Rosetta Stone and didn't get anywhere eventually. It was not enough. But one reason why Jean-François Champollion cracked it, because he was a linguist, he was a scholar of Greek and other ancient languages, And then he actually hypothesized that that the ancient Egyptian was sort of like the ancestor of Coptic. And then he actually took intensive Coptic classes, right? So he studied with a Coptic priest in Paris for an extended period and really became very steeped in the language, Coptic language. And so then the combination of his linguistic knowledge and knowledge of the Coptic language plus the parallel corpus then propelled him to success. And there were a number of challenges. We'll see some of those more. You know, we have the mix of ideograms, phonograms, determinatives. Then the Greek is not standard Greek, as in, you know, a classical Greek or biblical Greek or modern Greek. You know, it is the kind of Egyptian version at the time with some culture jargon. And then shock, there are inconsistencies even within the language and within the script. And there are also some inconsistencies between the different versions over there. So we have like an old example of not perfectly clean data, right? So this has been going on for a while. And so these are all challenges that kind of like make it more difficult.
You also have an example of a monolingual text giving you an improvement over just a bilingual text. So it's important to have a good language model because you couldn't do it just the parallel.
Mm-hmm. So they had a couple of hypotheses. You know, they hypothesized that the three texts in the three scripts mean the same thing. So in hindsight, you know, this is kind of pretty evident, but that was not totally for sure. They also had scholars, you know, who knew about Chinese and Japanese. So when Chinese write out a name like John May, they do it phonetically, right? And so they hypothesized that maybe if they look for foreign names in particular, that they would be largely phonetic, and the foreign names would include Greek names like, you know, Cleopatra. And so that all helped. An even better source is the decree of Hieroglyphs. So this is one thing that escaped the European plunder. It is still in Egypt, displayed in the Egyptian Museum. So it's also in hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek. And it's a much longer text, much more very topical variation, and then much better preserved, right? So you see the stone over there. So this is, I mean, few dents on the right side, but it's sort of like a much better source. Why is this less famous? Well, the first one was discovered in 1866, 4 decades after the hieroglyphs were cracked. So the Rosetta Stone became famous because it was the stele that basically led to the decipherment. This one certainly was better and bigger and better preserved and everything, but it came a couple of decades late. So this is why this is a little bit less known. But they found several copies of this, and so there's a lot of other parallel corpora there from the time.
Moral of the story: it's get it on archive if it's not clear.
Okay. All right.
So you mentioned on Rosetta that Coptic was probably the first written. Are there any theories? Greek. Sorry. Are there any theories on translation order? Did they go Greek to hieroglyphic Greek Coptic, or Greek?
So they think historians think it was first Greek because that was like the language of the upper class, and then Demotic, which was like practically used among the Egyptian speakers, and then hieroglyphs just for the prestige.
And are you saying that's also translation order? So hieroglyphs came from Coptic and Coptic from Greek?
So they translated from Greek to Demotic. And then the other step is not so much a translation because it is the same language, right? So remember, we have 3 scripts, but 2 languages. So the Demotic and hieroglyphs basically reflect the same language. One sort of like, fancy font, and one, a little bit more convenient for writing kind of font.
You're suggesting that it was written down the hieroglyphs before the middle section? That would have been madness, right? I have a hard time just getting an envelope address. So
I'm sure they weren't translating live on stone, right? So they probably did on something else. But I was wondering if there are any. So if there's an order in which they were written, there might be some artifacts.
Yeah. So anyway, I look a bit into that. So there's the order that historians believe, and there's maybe some additional support. Okay, so another quiz time here. So unless you are maybe Egyptian, and unless you've kind of strongly involved with NACLO, so this is from the North American Computational Linguistic Olympics, or now it's called Open Competition.
which is happening right now, but
and so
don't have any
as we speak, it happens here. So this was from an example from a couple of years ago. So we have two cartouches, and they represent names of people. So then the quiz question in Maclo was, one of them represents Cleopatra, which one? And two, what's the name of the other cartouche? Okay, so I give you like a moment to kind of figure that out. See whether we have smart people here in this room. Okay, Glenn.
Is it the second one, the Cleopatra?
Why do you pick the second one?
It's a 50-50 choice.
I think it's because maybe the equals an A, and so there's two of them at the end.
Right. So the number of hieroglyphs kind of corresponds to the number of letters in Cleopatra, and then very conveniently, if you map them up one by one, there, would be A and A, so they kind of match, which also confirms that it's probably left to right, which they might not have known at the time, right? There's always a chance it might have gone the other direction. So it's basically number of hieroglyphs and then the matching vultures. Okay, which leads us to the second question. So what's the name of the other cartouche? Gleb? Now you're the 50-50 thing doesn't work anymore. What, Jake? It is Ptolemy, yes. So we're actually able, so with Cleopatra, so we have the letter P over here, we have the T, the last one is an O, right? And this line is an L. So we get the first part, Ptolemy, and then these ones do not occur in here, so there's no owl and no reed. But so it's
I always figured Ptolemy was just like a short fourth thing where like it's actually some other consonant, but it's really.
No, so they have two characters for that. So the first one is Ptolemy. So we get a prize here for Jake. All right, excellent job. I'm sorry about the 50-50 thing. I was not quite as convincing. Now it turns out this is a little simplified and sanitized example, right? This is often the reality that what the kind of Western tourists use is not quite what's actually happening. So for one thing is, instead of this loaf of bread representing the letter T, we have a hand that represents the D sound, right? Instead of having a regular K, we have a slope here, a little slope that represents the letter. It's kind of like a K but deeper. So Besson will make the professional sound. So the letters are a little bit different. And then there's actually two more hieroglyphs at the end that were not included here. So there's an extra loaf of bread and an extra egg. And the loaf of bread can mean the letter T as in Kemet. It can mean loaf of bread, but it can also be a marker for feminine. And then the egg can either mean egg, or it can mean sun, S-O-N, or it may goddess. So we have two determiners, and they kind of disambiguate each other, right? So which one are compatible? Well, feminine and goddess are kind of go together well. So it's basically an indication that Cleopatra was designated as a goddess. So in Egyptian history, all pharaohs were considered gods.
You sure this wasn't an ad for Cleopatra brand egg bread?
Yes, I'm sure. Okay, so this is sort of like reality. So everything, in reality is a little bit more complicated than they would make you believe based on Maclo or on postcards for tourists. So writing one's name. So here I wrote about my name over here. So that's the word order there. So the green is my first name. So the quail shake stands for the letters U or W, and then you have a line for L, and then the viper for F, and then we have my last name. And so I kind of did this. So Hermjakob was with a Y sound. So then I picked the reed, which corresponds more to the way it's pronounced as opposed to the way it's written, and then used differently in English. And then I decided to not transliterate the weak E, which they often drop in Egyptian, as they also do it in Arabic. You always have to add this determinative. So I'm not a settlement. I'm not a GPE. I'm a male person. So you have to put the sitting man over there. So if you then translate that to modern English, it would kind of translate to pronouns he, him, his, I guess. And so this one means name. So you recognize this in the first part of language was kind of very similar. But there we have the stroke, here we don't. So they're both the mouth and this one are phonetic. And then here there's a clue. There's somebody holding the hand to the mouth. And so this means this is related to either eating or drinking or verbal communication. And then here we have a suffix, which is the same hieroglyph, which can be possessive like my for masculine. So that's my name is.
Wait, so is the blue thing like a nominal GPE indicator? Like the Egypt thing from before?
So this one is this is the phonetics for name, and this one is like the determinative.
We're literally saying name.
Name.
Okay, like in English.
So this is R and N. Then this is what name is phonetically in Egyptian, and then this is sort of like to kind of disambiguate. This is like a helper, which is not pronounced, but this one would be pronounced. So that if you write your name, you always have to either add the sitting seated man or seated woman to it. So there are a lot of tables with the Egyptian alphabet. First of all, it only depicts the uniliterals, where the symbols represent one sound. And most of what you find is either incomplete or has errors or both. So I actually made an effort to kind of come up with a little bit of a more corrected and comprehensive version that also gives a little bit of some hints in terms of pronunciation. So some of the sounds we don't have in English. So if you're like an Arabic speaker, you have a little bit of advantage because there are a number of sounds. So here we have here, and here we have the kind of deep-throated K sound. And then there's some characters that have variants. So instead of the owl, you might have this, for example, or these are basically just kind of variations of the same thing. Yeah. So the double read, so they have two symbols there. So the double read is kind of like a longer vowel for sure, like as an he. For the single read, it could be like as an it, or the Y in yes. So this is probably where they have the most doubt. So the predominant academic meaning is that it represents the ch sound. There are definitely other hypotheses that it might be an aspirated T sound. Sometimes on postcards you find like th as in th English, so that's probably not correct. So this should be like a guidance for you to kind of write your name in hieroglyphs here. So Egyptian has ideograms, phonograms, determinatives. So there's you might have the loaf of bread, which could actually mean loaf of bread, and then the next one, which could mean woman or goddess of daughter, and so forth. And it really stands for a concept. Then we have phonograms. So we have characters that stand for a single sound, or two sounds, or three sounds. And you start to see a little bit of problems. So this could mean seat, but it could also represent the letters ST or just SJS. This could also represent ST. This could also represent, the three letters. So there's a lot of ambiguity there. And so this is one reason why they often have then these confirming letters, right? So you remember in Kemet, we had the crocodile hide that represented K and M, and then you had the M kind of confirming it. And this is because of all this ambiguous mess in a sense that you kind of like need the help. And then we have determinatives that are not spoken or pronounced, but they give a practical hint of what this might be about, like a settlement, which is like a map of a little town at an intersection there. And for foreign locations, they often have a different one. So foreign meaning non-Egyptian, and then you have a couple of examples there. But there's a lot of overlap, so you have the same hieroglyphs, appear in different roles. And so this is why, for example, they have a single stroke as in the mouth to indicate, yes, we mean the mouth as an ideogram and not as a phonogram.
The symbol for settlement feels so modern and like continuous, right? Like it's still
Uh-huh.
You could see that on a map too.
Yeah, yeah. So it kind of it feels quite intuitive. Mhm. Now, if you're a tourist, you go to Egypt, they basically give you like a postcard worth this year, and it suggests that this is all there is, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, everybody, right? John.
Is there anything that relates to something like sun or how those more literally translated?
Yeah, we're actually going to have an example of sun in a moment. Mm-hmm. So, good question. You are not as opposed to John. 2 slides ahead. So we've seen the first one over here. We have the mouth of Egypt here. So the blue is an ideogram, and then the green is mostly phonetic. Then we have the second one is God and word. God, word together means hieroglyph. And then third one is a slightly convoluted way to write pyramid. So this character stands for the sounds of M and R. And here we repeat the M, we'll repeat the R. Here we have a terminative, pyramid. Here we have an extra determinative, which is house or building. And then here we have the plural marker, the 3 strokes. So that's what they would use to write pyramids there. So you can see it's sort of, well, this may be a reason why they kind of, why modern Coptic and modern languages kind of departed from this kind of system of writing.
And I see that kind of thing all the time with people who use emoji, where they'll say the thing and then put the emoji afterward. To double emphasize it, I guess.
Here you have kind of some cryptic things, right? So this means like king of Upper and Lower Egypt. It doesn't really look like that at all. And this is the plant representing Upper Egypt, and then the bee, the honeybee, represents Lower Egypt. And so it's like a shorthand for, so he of the sedge and the bee, meaning king of Upper and Lower Egypt. So there's a lot of cultural stuff to make it kind of work to understand things. Yes.
I'm just curious, how are numbers represented? Right? Is there a concept of?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So let's just kind of start at the top there. So one thing you might see a lot is this kind of a combination there that means life, prosperity, and health. And so on the left, you actually see an abbreviation. So this one means life, even by itself. But then in the written out form, it confirms the second and third sound. And then here, this is kind of spelled out. And the papyrus scroll basically is another determinative. It means it's an abstract thing, right? It's not something concrete that you can see. It's an abstract thing. And so here we have life. So this is something you might kind of wish for, or pray for: life, prosperity, and health.
What did the double marker mean? Like after the bird.
Yeah, bird.
Prosperity. Like 3 was plural, right?
Yeah, I wonder whether this might be equivalent, might have been slanted, might be a variant thing of the double read, possibly. So the 1 stroke really means, interpret this not phonetically, but as an ideograph. 3 means it's a plural marker, in plural as in 3 or more. I can look at that. My hunch is it might be just a variation. We'll see a few examples for that. Yeah. Then here we have, 1 complex characters representing scribe's equipment, and then man. So we have scribe. We had some discussion on Slack. Can Egyptians express things like pelican? So there's no hieroglyph, a single hieroglyph for pelican. Well, they're just going to spell it out, right? Using the sounds over here. And then here, for numbers, they were maybe slightly less sophisticated than the Indians that brought to us, the modern numbering system. So you have some lotus plants over here, each of which represents 1,000. And you just kind of put 6 of them, and then 7 of those was 500. These are 10s, 8 of those, and then 9 of those. So yes.
So if you're using the symbol repeated 3 times to mean many, right? Like, and you're deliberately using 3. Presumably that doesn't mean 2, right?
Yeah, so we're going to get to that in one more slide.
Just thinking about Jake's comments.
Yeah.
Could that just mean like 2?
I will have to. So I will have to kind of check it out there. So it might either be a variant form of the double read. So it's not as common as a single stroke with a double 1. I'll have to get back to you about that one there. And then finally, we have the date here. And so then for the date, we have symbols for the year, for the month, and for the day. And so it's a little bit like in Chinese where they use the same thing, right? So there's Chinese characters for year, for month, and for day that they put in dates, and they just have the numbers. Now, obviously, the ancient Egyptians did not use the Western calendar, so they started the year in a different time of the year, so they wouldn't have used it exactly like this one over here, but it's sort of like in the spirit. So here you see the sun signal, which we're going to see again later. Yes?
For the numbers, how would you know whether you have to be left or right or right to left, right? At least for this example.
Well, it doesn't really matter, right? Because so if you have like an Indian style, then of course the direction matters, right? For this one, it doesn't matter because there's different symbols for the ones, for the tens, for the hundreds, and for the thousands, right?
And past? Past thousands, so tens of thousands.
There's probably like one or two more categories there, but probably not trillions. So the national debt was probably not quite that high.
I don't know.
So we have nouns. So finally we get so Egyptian has 3 grammatical members: singular, dual for 2, and plural. And plural is 3 or more. And so you have that in a few languages. So in Arabic, I think has a 2, right? And even Old English had a dual, right? So people don't quite remember that. So if you go more than 1,000 years back with English, you also have a dual. So here we have brother, first phonetically, and then here we have a male determinative. And then here we have the dual form. So that has, this is like a dual phonetic suffix. And then we have 2 guys. And then for 3, it will have the seated man and then the plural marker with the 3 strokes. So there's 2 grammatical genders, masculine and feminine. So possessive pronouns are added as a suffix to the end. As a general order for noun phrases are article, noun, and adjective. Articles only came later, so the old Egyptian didn't have articles, but then they became prevalent quite a bit later on in Egyptian. And then the adjectives have to agree with the noun. Take
dual phonetic marker. You mean you repeat the sound?
So here, see an example here. So here you have, so the dual marker here is we, something like that. And here it's just the W. So the phonetic suffixes for the duals and plurals are a little bit different.
Oh.
So you see the number marker both phonetically and then also semantically. So it's kind of like a dual in that sense. So sentences, I don't want to bore you too much with grammar. So one cool thing is that for present tense, the predominant word or subject, verb, object. For past and future, it's reversed. Negations and question words are typically at the beginning of a sentence. There are prepositions like in English, and preposition phrases. We have first preposition and then the noun phrase after that. And there's, of course, tons of more prepositions than this one over here. So we're going to visit the Getty Villa. I have a few phrases here that we might see on Saturday. So first one means true of voice or justified. So this is like when somebody dies, was he a good person who didn't commit sins? So this would be like a phrase that would often be very used. And one thing we'll see on Saturday is a field of reeds. So you can see, I think those are reeds here. So this is like an irrigation canal. And so this is like equivalent in Egyptian mythology of like a paradise. Then we have the sun god, Ra or Re. So this is phonetic, R and A, Ra. And then sun, God. And so he would, and you can recognize him, in pictures there with a sun disk above the head, often like with a falcon. And then we have Osiris, the god of the dead and rebirth. That's how you spell it there, or there's one of the spellings. And then very cool, you have Amit, the devourer of the dead. So here we literally have phonetically. This is a determinative for swallowing. And then we have mit, and then actually here for the dead. And then we actually have like a dead person falling with blood coming out of the head, right? So this is kind of pretty creepy depiction there for the dead. And so that's, and this character is often shown with a crocodile head and other dangerous animals included as well. So we see some of those characters on Saturday. One thing I noticed is that it seemed that they often fail to apply spell checkers for the language. So there's in some corpus, they have 10 different spellings for pyramid or pyramids. One difference is maybe explained. So this is a plural marker. You see there's different types of plural markers, kind of different variants over here. Here's a case where they have a variant form for instead of the owl, they have this one over here. Sometimes they have the extra house, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have extra little letters, sometimes they don't. But the pyramid part is kind of nothing compared to like Osiris. And so Osiris, you have like 30 plus options where they found different ways to spell it. And you can see the same characters appearing over and over again, right? So typically you have some sort of god, or you have this is like a falcon on a standard, which is kind of like representing the divine. You often have either a sun or an eye or something like that. But there's a lot of different variations there. And you can see that, this makes kind of decipherment hard if you have the spelling variation. Same for the field of reeds. So typically you have some reeds, all have this kind of place marker. And even for hieroglyphs, you would think that, if they've been hieroglyphs, maybe they have one way to kind of chisel hieroglyph. But there's, some variation where they have confirming letters over here, where they might have a determinative or not. And, there's even different word order here. So there's some variation that kind of adds a little bit of spice to the language over here. So if you write a system to kind of understand Egyptian hieroglyphs, you need to have something that's very robust.
I'm still interested in the volume question because, like, if you only had inscriptions on, it seems like it's a lot of effort to make these, right? By like transcribing or whatever. And so it'd just be kind of surprising. You'd have like, whatever, millions of words.
Well, they had a lot of people and they had a lot of time, right?
So, and a lot of people who were able to write, right? As well.
Yeah, so I actually asked the question once, so how many people were literate? And we don't know for sure, but there's some historians who believe that up to 10% of Egyptians were literate, which is,
so right?
Which is a lot for the time. And, they kept going at it for thousands of years. And some people, did nothing but write. So this is like an example of a little bit more Egyptian text over here. Just want to point out a few things here. So we have the obelisk over here. So this is spell out the phonetics. So we have tichlin or something like that. And then we have determinative, which is 2 obelisks for, so that's kind of like cute. See what else we have. One thing we have over here, cubits. Here we have the stroke to the right of the forearm. Here we have it underneath. So they were not even fully consistent even within the same line here. So if you look at its breadth over here, how can we break this up? So these are phonetic. Then we have a papyrus scroll. And we know that the possessives are added as a suffix. We know that this is a determinative. So the its is actually represented by this folded cloth. And this would mean Brent. This is phonetic, the determinative, and then the possessive suffix. And here you can see there's duplication over here. So I'm pretty sure this is sort of like the dual form, referring to the 2 obelisks. So if you know a little bit about Egyptian, you can already kind of figure out, some of the details in text like this. So there are several exhibitions at the Getty Villa, which is a great place to visit. So one is the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So they're exhibiting 7 papyrus scrolls and linen mummy wrappings. It's open until Monday. And this is from Getty's own collection of scrolls that they've been sitting on for 40 years. And this is the first time now that they actually show them. And I don't know whether this is a hint. And then yesterday, there's another exhibition that opened for a year. Do we need Justin's help? So another one opened yesterday. It's Sculpted Portraits, so maybe a little bit less text on special loan from the British Museum. And then next to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there's a super cool gold bust of Katie Kaufman's favorite Roman emperor, the philosopher emperor Marcus Aurelius. So that's also cool to look at. So anyway, so here are selected resources. So there's some online resources. There's a couple of cool videos. So if you really, how do we know what Egyptian sounded like? So that was one of the questions. So there's a little bit more detail on that. The last one is kind of also cool. So this is done by somebody specializing in ancient languages, and they actually have the tale of the shipwrecked sailor in ancient Egyptian, set to the tune of the Wellerman song. So if you're interested in what Egyptian might have sounded like, 3,000 years ago, I can watch that. And so I think we're running out of time here. Any questions? I mean, you already asked a lot of good questions during the talk, and I'll be happy to kind of share the slides. You missed the main part of Greek. Yeah.
I had another meeting.
Yeah. So I'll share some of the Greek highlights with you later.
Okay.
Anyway, so thank you very much, and I think we can stop recording now.
Awesome. Thank you so much all for attending. Ulf's talk was super interesting and makes a good build up for the exhibit that we'll be attending this weekend. Next week, we have Yufei Tian coming from UCLA to give us a talk on harnessing black box control to boost common sense in language models generation. So that should be really interesting too. So please stay tuned and join us next week as well. Thank you.
If you're coming to the